Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Stacey Storino. Welcome back to my channel. This is the Mama Saga, where I am a Marvel-loving mama and attorney by day, but I am a Marvel comic book fan, Marvel Studios, MCU, Disney Plus, as it relates to MCU fan, an enthusiast by night. I have loved Marvel Comics since 1986, and I've been an attorney since 1998. So today I'm going to give you my reactions and whatever kind of Easter eggs and theories I can do now that I have gone through my first raw viewing of Werewolf by Night. Spoiler City. So I put it in the comments down below, and it should be at the beginning of the description just in case. So Spoiler City, if you haven't seen Werewolf by Night yet, I don't want to ruin it for you. I don't often do spoiler-free reviews on my channel anyway. I'm not saying I never do. This is Spoiler City, okay? But keep in mind also, it's my first viewing. I can go back and release edited videos to my channel, which I normally do. I've been really busy with attorney stuff in the background as of late. Okay, so the premise is that monster hunters gather to pay respects to their deceased leader, Ulysses Bloodstone, and they're thrust into a deadly game because the Bloodstone is this, powerful artifact, and, it can only have one owner, and only one person apparently can use it, right? So Ulysses is gone. His daughter is Elsa Bloodstone, as you may know if you've been a long-time Marvel comic book saga fan. But as we learn, as this, it's not an episode, it's like a featurette, or it's like a short movie. As it progresses, we learn that Elsa would have normally been able to just declare, ownership to the Bloodstone by birthright, but we get into it in just a minute in terms of why she has to play the game, and she'll be given equal treatment and an equal shot, but woo, she's definitely got to be careful there. All right, so when they first start off, you don't just go into the Marvel Studios trailer. You get like a Marvel Studios like special presentation, and the way it looks in terms of the logo and the color scheme and the way it plays, it's very much like, I don't know, it had like the 60s, 70s, 80s kind of B movie. Woo, my chair's creaky. B movie kind of feel to it. As a Generation Xer, I totally get this. Not that horror is my favorite genre normally, but I think the way Marvel Studios did this, a very large audience could be afraid and be exposed to some horror and yet not have nightmares. Like, I would totally have had nightmares if it went too far. And I think the fact that it was shot in black and white until, I don't want to totally, this is Spoiler City. So at the end, it goes into color. And I love how they do the transition where it goes into color. But it was black and white for quite a bit throughout, and with some of the splatter and gore that was kind of being simulated, depicted, and shown, if it was in color, I would have been like, whoa. But they definitely leaned into this genre really, really well. The way I, as an attorney, feel that they've really done excellent research and writing for She-Hulk. They've woven in quite a bit of that like legal show on top of it being a comedy, on top of it being like an Avengers Marvel superhero sort of thing. So I did pin both on the live stream and the replay. You'll see the playlist pinned for my full She-Hulk playlist, including videos, edited videos that were shot and uploaded before episode 1 dropped, all the way up until right now while this is being shot live, episode 8 dropped, and I just did my reaction to that yesterday. Or October 6th. This is October 7th, and it's the first day that Marvel Studios has released Werewolf by Night. So it's really cool. I do love the black and white. It lends itself really well to like the feel that they were going for in the beginning, that Marvel Studios presentation is in color, but then we immediately go into black and white, and that's fine. But I remember really super late at night or super early in the morning, my father would love to watch like the B movies, especially like the horror B movies. He'd either be fascinated by them or think they were hilarious or both. So I can't wait to get his reaction to this. And he can certainly take like rated R and like totally gory horror and stuff, but I cannot. So I was able to handle it. And again, I think it being in black and white when you have like the splatter gore happen, that totally helped. So then we go from the beginning where we have the Marvel Studios special presentation. It kind of comes in 60s, 70s, early 80s style. That's color. Then we transition into black and white. Now you have the more traditional Marvel Studios trailer that sometimes they mess with on Disney Plus, and I love it. Like when they had the I Am Groot featurette series, they messed with it. Or with Miss Marvel, most of the times, like the Marvel Studios trailers could be a different color, a different theme, all sorts of stuff. Here you have the more traditional looking Marvel Studios trailer showing up. It's in black and white. And at times there's like werewolf claws or like, beast or monster claws going through it as it's playing through, otherwise in black and white, otherwise looking like total traditional trailer there. And occasionally you've got like thunderbolts shooting through it. Now, I wasn't sure, since this was my first watching at the time, I was like, are they having like all this crashing, like thunderbolt lightning thing? Because that goes with like a grindhouse or like a splatterhouse or B movie kind of feel, you know, your Dracula werewolf stuff, it's usually a dark and stormy night. Like, yes, but once you get to the end of it, you're like, oh, now I totally get why, in retrospect, they had all that kind of crashing, like thunder and lightning. Definitely throughout, it had that like grindhouse or 60s, 70s, early 80s horror B movie feel to it. They really stayed very true to that feel, and I loved it for that. When you get the first screen after the trailer is over, I like how you have like this hand drawn looking artistic depiction of the Avengers, like how we first saw them get together in the MCU. And it's in black and white, of course, because at this point everything is. And they are described as being part of like the known universe. And then it says, the narrator says, but what of darkness? Like we see a demonic looking face on the screen. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't think that that's like Mephisto, obviously, but I know that with She-Hulk, kind of spoilers too on She-Hulk, you had the character Madison make a pact with clearly a devil. And I do think Mephisto, we have to have Mephisto at this point introduced. He's something as we go into phase, 4, or as phase 4, as we go into 5 and 6, especially, let me put it like that. As we go into phases 5 and 6, we're going to lean into the Midnight Suns harder. We already have Doctor Strange. We already have Moon Knight. But you need Mephisto in there. If you don't have Mephisto, who's the big bad that they're going to go up against? We know that the Blade movie, they've got new writing and stuff. So Mahershala Ali is happier with what he's going to do with that character. And Blade's important because once he's in there, he's going to be in there for a number of years, I'm sure with his own franchise, and I'm sure as part of the Midnight Suns. So, when you see this demonic face come up on the screen, you don't think it's Mephisto if you're used to the Marvel comic book saga, but you're like, oh, they're definitely teasing like the supernatural, the occult, and all the kind of like beasts and beasties that, yes, the Midnight Suns would go against, Mephisto or no Mephisto. So we're definitely starting to lean harder and more into the whole Midnight Suns thing, which is good. So then we see some lunar fasces and some daggers. On my second viewing, I'm going to take a bigger look and like see like how that might play into things. But obviously, if you've got a werewolf, the phases of the moon is going to affect them. So it might be as simple as that. There's another scene that comes right up after that where you still have the hand drawings, and of course, everything's in black and white. You see some underwater creatures, like demonic looking creatures from under the water, and you have a trident. And I'm wondering if You let me know in the comments down below, live or on the replay. Wakanda Forever is going to be in a couple of weeks. So you have to sit there and say to yourself, they knew when they were going to release this, and it was going to have to be in October. I mean, come on, werewolves, Dracula, all that kind of stuff is, October is the big time, right? Going into Halloween. So, like, and they knew that Wakanda Forever was going to come out on November. I like how it's at least still currently going to be released on November 11th. 1111 is a number that has to do, or a number sequence that has to do with, like, some say high spiritual like expression. So, the character or the role of, Black Panther is definitely going to evolve, change, and have to iterate from where it originally was. So I love that Ryan Coogler is keeping everything on November 11th, because I think that's kind of cool. There's like a little bit of an Easter egg or a message just in the release date. But when I see the underwater demonic creatures and I see the trident, I'm definitely thinking about the movie Wakanda Forever that comes out next. And definitely, we're not dealing with Atlantis. We're dealing with the underwater kingdom of Namor, nevertheless. And I'm thinking the trident, the underwater beasts, like, underwater like threats are definitely going to be hardcore introduced into the MCU with that movie. And then I'm wondering how much Werewolf by Night, Elsa Bloodstone, and the Midnight Suns end up coming to play with underwater like beasts and demons and devils and such. So then the narrator says that monsters dwell alongside those who hunt and slaughter them with pride. And then the Bloodstone name shows up immediately. If you followed the Marvel comic book saga, Elsa Bloodstone has been like a pivotal member of the Midnight Suns, and so the Bloodstone family and the Bloodstone artifact itself factors in quite nicely to a lot of the storytelling that goes on there. So the patriarch Ulysses Bloodstone, he's died at this point, the narrator tells us. And so the Bloodstone relic has to be taken up by a new owner or master. So we're being told by the narrator as we go into the scene that it's Ulysses Bloodstone's funeral. And hunters have gathered from around the globe, and that they're strangers to one another. So nobody knows each other's name really, except for the Bloodstones themselves, because like Ulysses been the leader, and his family has been so pivotal to running the hub of the hunters and that whole underworld connected to it. And of course, they have the Bloodstone itself, which is so important when you're hunting and tracking and fighting monsters, especially the most powerful one. So I do think it's interesting within their culture. I don't know how you feel about this. So they really don't know each other's names. They just kind of like know of one another. And it's interesting how when they first meet and that big, like, that big rotunda there, where Ulysses' coffin is being laid out, it's interesting how initially they're talking to each other and they're not using names, but they're acknowledging whether or not they've seen one another before. And some people might be like, that's really weird. How could you not know each other's names? How could you like exist in a world together where you're working on the same or similar plane? But as an attorney, I used to represent, through one third-party insurance provider, a whole bunch of taxi cab drivers down the Bronx in New York City. I'm admitted in New York. And I remember when I first took on this account and I went and talked to my client and we went to do a deposition, and he's sitting there explaining how, okay, this is, of course, my name. I'm identifying myself for the transcript and for the case. I'm such and such party, but you should know that when I work, no one knows my name. No one knows my name in this taxi company. We all have numbers and we refer to each other as numbers. And when we log in to get paid or to track hours or stuff, because this is going back to the early aughts, we only use our numbers. And if we talk over like a two-way radio or something, we still use numbers. So there are people that I know by face, that I get along with, that work my shift or take over the taxi when I leave and my shift ends. Because with those taxis, they were going 24 hours a day. So they would be driven by two people, one for 12 hours and another person for another 12 hours. And they only knew each other by name. Their corporate culture, you didn't ask each other's names. You didn't need it. You had the numbers, and only one person was assigned to a number, and that was it. You might never know or think of that person's name. Which, I'm not a taxi cab driver. I'm a lawyer, but I found that fascinating. And they all knew who each other were, but they didn't know each other's names. So kind of similar to that, it's kind of like that when it comes to the hunters. They don't know each other's names. And they may not hang out, but they may end up working in or on like a similar situation with a monster or this huge beast, right? So some of them are kind of known to one another, right? So the narrator says, "Woe to the monster who is among them or being hunted by them." And as this line is being said, oh, well, guess what? We see one of the lead characters, Jack Russell, who is the Werewolf by Night character. And if you know the comic book Saga, that's the name they used. Jack Russell Terrier is a dog, and so Jack Russell is a werewolf, so ha ha ha. So Jack says to another hunter named, we learn his name eventually, Jovan. So Jack explains that he's wearing makeup, so he kind of looks like a Day of the Dead kind of, look to his face. He's acknowledging he's wearing makeup. I think Jovan recognized him and said something about the makeup. And so Jack explains that the makeup he wears is to honor his ancestors. And so there's kind of some recognition, and there's kind of a little bit of discourse between Jack and Jovan ends up acknowledging or reaffirming that the hunters basically have anonymity in large part with respect to one another, but that, while it's very important to have this, it's a very lonely life. And we learn that Jovan has been doing this for 30 years. Later, he's attributed with having, I think, like 57 kills. So he's averaging almost 2 monster kills a year. And Jack doesn't tell him how long he's been doing anything, I don't think. Again, this is my first viewing. And he doesn't tell him how many kills he has, but we find out later. So he's asked if any of the trophies, like the monster heads that are mounted on the walls and stuff, are any of his handiwork. And Jack says no. But then he points to one of the like taxidermist type trophies, one of the busts, and it appears to be of a werewolf. And he acknowledges that he's fought that kind of creature before. Because that's kind of like a double entendre. We don't know if Jack, as in his Werewolf by Night form, has fought evil wolves or werewolves. We don't know if what he's referring to in his conversation with Jovan is that he's fought werewolf beasts before, because he is one. Of course, he doesn't tell Jovan this at this time, but he's used to fighting or struggling or being at war with werewolves. So then we see Elsa Bloodstone show up. She's the daughter of Ulysses Bloodstone, which is the case in the Marvel comic book Saga. She is greeted by Verussa, who it turns out is, or was Ulysses' wife. And she's got like this big long veil that I have to tell you, between the black and white and the veil and the way it fell on her face, and then like the look that the actress pulled off under the veil, wow, that was compelling. And I was kind of afraid of her, which is what they wanted you to feel, right? So she shows up, she talks to Elsa, and she says, "Elsa, after 20 years, I hope you didn't feel obligated to come, to her own father's funeral." So we're like pregnant with backstory here, right? Like, and Elsa thinks that the bloodstone is hers, period. And that's what she tells Verussa. And she just says, "I'll leave. I'm happy to leave once the bloodstone's mine." And Verussa like makes general reference to some of the powers that the bloodstone has. And I'll do a separate video doing a more deep dive into the bloodstone. But what they mention here, so that it's more, we know, is canon to the MCU, is the bloodstone can give you the strength of Yanks. protection. It's capable of enchanting, definitely monsters. So Elsa doesn't care that she's taking all this stuff off. Sure, I want it. And once I've gotten it, it's nobody's business what I do with it or why I care about it, right? So for all we know, Elsa wants it for sentimental value. Because she makes it clear in her conversation with Verussa Bloodstone, who we're guessing is her stepmother, as we get some more exposition. It's not like a full blown exposition dump, but we do get enough backstory so that if you're not into the Midnight Suns or you didn't really know who Elsa Bloodstone is, Varus is a character that they created for the MCU, and it might have been to kind of give you this exposition because Ulysses is already dead, right? So she just makes it clear, she's like her mother. She could have been training, but she's been gone for the last 20 years. And Elsa makes it clear that she did training. It's just wasn't there, wasn't with her father or with Verussa around. It's kind of clear that these two women don't really get on very well. But you don't know if it's because Elsa just hasn't been around for 20 years and her stepmother, Ulysses' wife, or his new wife. I don't know if in the MCU, Elsa Bloodstone's mother was, a lover of Ulysses, but he was always married to Verussa because Verussa is a character that they created for the MCU. It's kind of unclear, but Verussa does make it clear in her like mini exposition dump that this isn't her blood daughter, it's her stepdaughter. Um, you know, um, and so, Elsa just keeps being a broken record and saying, I'm just going to fight for it then. If you're going to make me fight for it, that's fine. I'm certain I'll win the Bloodstone. I'm not worried. I've been training these 20 years, just not with you. And she makes a point that it's without his training, meaning her father. So clearly they've had a falling out along the way. You get that nugget in there and you're like, okay, so that's why they're not, they didn't get on and she's been gone for 20 years. And Verussa acknowledges, she goes, you were so promising growing up. We all believed that you would surpass your father. Instead, you seemed satisfied to emulate your mother. I did what I could with you. So at least for a time, she trained with Verussa. And then she concludes that Elsa was the greatest disappointment of Ulysses' life. And they stare at each other and nobody's blinking. It's like, just a tough little Mexican standoff over there, right? So so right now at this point, because Ulysses is gone and everybody's convened there, Verussa's running the show. And like she has a little assistant trailing her that probably trailed Ulysses, until he died. And so she's at the point the leader of the monster hunting cult, but she acknowledges, this bloodstone's going to be someone else's. I've got it right now. So she goes around the circle. They really don't drop names so much at that point, but she basically goes around pointing to everybody and acknowledging how many kills they've had. No names are dropped along the way at this point, and like I said earlier, this isn't in their corporate culture to generally do. When we get to Jack, though, this is when we find out. Like Jovan was saying he had 57 kills, but it turns out that Jack is acknowledged with more than 100 kills. So that's basically double that of Jovan, who over 30 years has had 57. So he's like, holy moly. So we don't know how many years Jack has been alive or how long he's been doing it or when did he start racking up that more than 100. We don't know. So then we have a coffin in the middle because it's Ulysses' funeral. And Verussa's laying her head up against the coffin. It stood upright. She says, oh, my dear heart, and she's going on and on about how much she loved Ulysses and how awesome he was. And I love how Elsa's just dragging her seat along and it's like loud and it's scraping the floor. And she pulls it over and just dumps herself in the seat. So it's kind of like whatever my father's dead, whatever my stepmom is going on and waxing rhapsodic about how awesome he is, but I don't care. The whole way that scene was played out, Elsa didn't have to say a word. It was very clearly communicated to the audience. She could have cared less about either one of them. So Verussa, I think she had ended up saying that she was Ulysses' second wife, so maybe Elsa's mom was the first wife. Again, this is my first viewing. She's clearly not Elsa's birth mother. So then she talks about she's still waxing rhapsodic and mooning over Ulysses and how awesome he was. And then she puts in this TMI kind of detail that he was a lover without equal. And, and of course, that made me laugh. And Elsa's sitting there grimacing because whether Verussa was her blood mother or her stepmother, who cares? That is TMI. It's totally inappropriate. And the man's daughter doesn't want to hear about your sex life with him. So the assistant helps to open up this, I guess, big, heavy, coffin. And we have a mechanical corpse in there, which is so kind of like gaudy, kind of like, goofy, kind of like 70s, super early 80s, like B moving feel, horror B movie feel. You could even push it back to like the 50s and 60s. And it would still have that feel. I noticed several times throughout this, and you probably did too, that there are gramophones. And so that makes it even more old timey feel than like the 70s, 80s. And I know a lot of the movies that were made in the B horror movie grindhouse kind of phase, they would look back to like the 50s, or maybe even push back to the 20s and stuff like that. If we were looking at the origin of some of the biggest monsters out there, sure, you could go back into the 1800s and whatnot. So having gramophones around kind of harkens back a couple of decades beforehand, which is really kind of cool. And the way one of the gramophones plays out in the end and brings us into color was really very classy. They did it really, really well. So the mechanical corpse has like pre-recorded lines because Ulysses knew he was going to die, and we're all going to die someday, right? So he prepared for this, and so he thanks Verussa, which is fine, and then says that the Bloodstone family and the Bloodstone itself and the leadership overall of all of the hunters can only be given to the strongest and most committed hunter, someone that's most committed to our mission. And I think that's interesting. Again, I said spoiler city. Given the fact that Elsa wins the Bloodstone, which does match, it is comic book accurate that she should have her family heirloom, which is what happened in the Marvel comic book saga. The fact that she won it wasn't what surprised me. It's the fact that, Ulysses said here that, it's one thing to say the strongest person should win it. But to say the most committed to our mission, well, the mission of the hunters is to kill all the monsters they can. And Verussa talks about why that mission is really one of mercy in her opinion. And you could make the argument that going and killing all these monsters, it's merciful to humanity so the monsters aren't preying upon them. And you could say if the monsters are like miserable, twisted creatures, putting them out of their misery is, merciful for them too. So it could be that Elsa, we're not really sure of this by the time we get to the end of this like featurette or mini movie. We're not sure if Elsa left her father in whole or in part because she didn't agree with the full thrust of the mission anymore. She might have been like more open-minded. I'll kill the evil monsters and I can coexist with the good ones. I don't know if she started out that way. For sure, by the time we get to the end of this movie, she definitely has collabed with a monster or two. So there's only one Bloodstone, as Verussa explains. It can only have one keeper at a time. So that's important. Like once the Bloodstone acknowledges the owner, theoretically, someone else shouldn't be able to use it. So she does narrate. So we have yet another little mini exposition dump. It was supposed to be passed down throughout as it had been from Bloodstone to Bloodstone member, the Bloodstone artifact. But while it was supposed to be Elsa's automatically by birthright, because she'd been absent for, we were told, 2 decades, she's now lost the automatic claim. However, Verussa says that she can earn it like any other hunter anyway. Because one of the hunters complained that she was there crashing the event like a backyard wedding. That was Barrasso. Um, Nevertheless, Bruce is like, she has a right to be here like anyone else. She's a hunter. She's had her kills and stuff like that. But we're not going to. She does claim that she has the right to be there and the right to compete. But it's also like for everyone else, she's fair game for anyone else to attack. She's fair game for anyone else to win what would have been her birthright. Or something, the artifact that would be hers by birthright. So, Verussa unexpectedly comes to her defense, which I was kind of like, alrighty, because she hated her guts a moment before. And she also says that for any hunter that dies in the course of the contest, they will be honored appropriately. I don't know what that meant. Because let me tell you, at the end, nobody was being honored. So she acknowledges that the way this is going to go is they're going to affix the bloodstone directly to the hide of a monster that everyone has to kill. And she says that this monster is unlike any other monster that they'd ever encountered before. Actually, the mechanical corpse that's supposed to be the likeness of Ulysses explains it. It's a monster unlike anything else that the hunters have ever seen. So each hunter places, it was kind of, it's black and white. It's kind of like dark because, it's a horror thing. So it should look like that. It looks like every hunter put like a ring into the skull. They each got like a tablet with a Norse glyph on it. It looked to be like a Norse or Norwegian glyph on it. And I guess that determined who went into the maze first to go after the monster. Everybody went in. It's not like they took turns. Jack ended up pulling the rune Fehu. I'm going to say it wrong, and I apologize. Fehu or Fe, the rune. And it looks like, well, how do I say this? It's meant to... its name means wealth, okay? It is often used in Norse, Old English, Icelandic. There is an Anglo-Saxon version of it, but it all means wealth. It kind of cognates to the English meaning of sheep or cattle. If you had a lot of sheep or cattle back in days of yore, you had a lot of wealth, right? Money, cattle, wealth. So there's also a corresponding letter in the Gothic alphabet for this symbol, and that is, it's given like the reconstructed name of, I can't even say it. You know what? It means like a high degree of certainty. And there is an interesting Norwegian poem about this rune. And it says, wealth is a source of discord amongst kin. The wolf lives in the forest. So that's interesting because we know Jack Russell is Werewolf by Night. Discord amongst kin, you have Verussa and you have Elsa Bloodstone, and clearly Elsa had an axe to grind for whatever the reason against her father Ulysses. And then in the old Icelandic version of this poem, it says, wealth is a source of discord amongst kin, and fire of the sea, and path of the serpent. Now, keep in mind the imagery that we saw in the beginning of this movie featurette. You did see undersea monsters, you saw underwater, you saw a trident, right? So I'm like, more ties to Wakanda forever, perhaps, and Namor and his underwater kingdom. And then you have an Anglo-Saxon version of this poem. It says, wealth is a comfort to all, yet must everyone bestow it freely if they wish to gain honor in the sight of the Lord. So given how everything plays out with Elsa dealing with Jack / Werewolf by Night, dealing with Ted the Man Thing, the Bloodstone and the Bloodstone name, that's kind of wealth. Elsa certainly seemed to come from money. The backdrop is, it's got to take a lot of money to have all the property for the maze and all the fine trappings that we see, even though it's black and white, in that kind of rotunda where the funeral or the wake is being held. So she's got money. She's come from wealth. She's come from a distinguished long line of wealthy and successful hunters. And the bloodstone, of course, is an artifact, again, that she would have gotten by birthright. And it's like, wealth is a comfort to all, yet must everyone bestow it freely if they wish to gain honor. So you're wondering to yourself, like, because she was willing to work with Jack as things continued on, and because she was willing to give Man Thing his freedom as long as she got the bloodstone and such, you wonder if, like, that's how she gained honor, because she ended up, again, remember I said this was spoiler city, that's how she ends up winning. That's how she and Jack are the only two people that end up surviving besides the assistant, the whole scenario, right? So I guess the ring that each hunter puts into the skull to participate in this competition is a ring that would identify them to other hunters, because they're not going to use names. There's clearly not a directory of names, right? So that's how they identify one another. So anyway, going back to the tablet, where, hey, Mike, what's going on? Have you seen Werewolf by Night yet? Horror scares me, but I think this was very, very well done. And thank God it was in black and white, because when things got really nasty, I was like, oh, could you imagine if this was in color? Holy moly, I'd be puking all over the place. So I think it was extremely well done. I loved it too. I really did. So when Jack gets the Norse tablet and it's got the symbol of wealth, Verussa says to him, okay, you won. That's the top symbol. That's the top tablet. So you go in first. But then, of course, everyone follows behind him. But it kind of gives him a head start. So, the hunters all say their creed. I have to watch it again to be able to get all the words of the creed, but it does include the line, there is no peace without blood. So again, as Verussa says later, there's a mission they believe of mercy. When they kill the monsters, it's merciful to humanity because they're not, preyed upon by the monsters. It's also merciful because they put the monsters out of what they believe is their misery. And as we know, when Jack Russell starts to share how hard it's been to fight off, his lycanthropy, with Elsa down the line, it's not been easy. He has to lock himself in on the 30th day when there's a full moon. He's got to go through all these protocols so that he doesn't kill somebody, and it's only worked once before Elsa. That doesn't sound like a real peaceful life necessarily. And obviously he can't live some bucolic life in peace with like this whole huge family, or it wouldn't be easy for him to do, right? So he doesn't have peace. There will be no peace for him without blood. There will be no peace for Elsa without blood. Clearly, we have plenty of blood splattered by the end of this thing. And then Man Thing can't go off and live in peace without others shedding blood on his behalf. And he kills a couple of folks too. So Jack enters into this huge maze. The other hunters do follow after a little bit of delay. Of course, total horror show stuff where you have the creepy, unsettling, old-timey music that's coming out of the gramophone. As I said earlier, the use of gramophones throughout was really cool because it kept everything grounded in this old-timey grindhouse horror movie feel. But also back in the 60s, 70s, early 80s, when they did those throwback movies, you were going back a couple of decades to when gramophones were definitely being used, say 20s, 30s, 40s. So the fact that they continue to use gramophones throughout, it's like, you don't know exactly when this, whole set of circumstances is taking place in the MCU. But even if it were taking place in current time, it feels like you've been thrown back to days of yore. Mike says, hey Mike, couldn't believe they showed the gore, not very Disney Marvel, but then the humor came very Disney Marvel. It is a great Halloween treat. I love the MCU for doing this. Well, and I said this earlier, but I don't think you were here at that point, Mike. Um, Thank God it was in black and white, because if they showed that in color, wow. And they definitely played with the shadows to kind of throw veils on things. And when the door was closing behind them, it made things very darker. So when blood was splattering on the screen for us, the viewer, again, it was, they tamed it down as much as they could. I really appreciate Marvel Studios for taking on as many genres as they have, especially over the last 2 years since Disney Plus has really been kicked off. You know, they have not been, you know, there's no lack of creativity there. Like She-Hulk is a very different property from Werewolf by Night, which is a very different property from Miss Marvel, which is yet again a very different property from Loki. You know what I mean? So like it's amazing to me that they did it. And of course the timing is important, but I've already spotted several Easter eggs that will connect this or be acting as a through line to Wakanda Forever, to Namor, to the Midnight Suns, and perhaps dealing with under the sea devils, demons, and stuff. So it's really, really cool how they're laying down the foundation for all of that. They're definitely sowing the seeds to reap in future seasons. That played out pretty nicely, right? So Elsa and Jack bump into one another. Now, it's been kind of made clear, you know, it's every person for themselves. Whoever dies in the contest is going to be honored. But the first words out of Jack's mouth to Elsa is, I suggest we just pass each other by. And Elsa's like, what? And he repeats himself. Just a second. So already you know, if you've never seen Werewolf by Night, if you didn't know who the Bloodstones were, you never saw the Midnight Suns, it's made very clear to you that Jack isn't there to play the game the way everyone else is. And that he has an ulterior motive. Otherwise, he'd just do what the next hunters do when they see the two of them, and that's attack them. So, you know, but Elsa's thrown. So the seed's been planted with her that she's just like, huh. Oh, Mike says, no argument there. You won't find more of a bigger Marvel stand shill than me. I love the MCU. I do too. I mean, can y'all tell? Can you tell? They've given me so much joy since I first started reading Uncanny X-Men and then very quickly New Mutants after that since 1986. Holy moly. So Jovan, and attacks Elsa with the axe, but she fights him off. She takes his axe and runs up a hall with it. There's like this trail of steaming kind of like footprints, and I don't know if it's like blood or if it's just ooze from Man-Thing. Because it's like black and white and gray, all this grayscale going on. It's hard to tell, but that kind of adds to like the uncertainty and it throws you off your balance, right? So it's a trail of something. But it's part of the fun of the event. You're kept guessing and you're always left askew. Elsa, Leorn attacks her and she ends up chopping off his hand. He's got a dart launching weapon that's attached to the hand with all this accoutrement. So, but then he's still alive and he doesn't stop. I guess it's adrenaline that keeps him going, because if somebody chopped off my hand or arm, I don't know that I would be doing anything else other than screaming and passing out. But she fights him off. She rolls to get the weapon from his severed hand, and she brings up the severed hand with him. Oh my gosh. And shoots him with his own weapon, I guess in the throat or whatever. So she sees Jovan coming back around. She rolls over with Leorn, covering his mouth, because obviously he's screaming. You know, how much horror can you possibly pack into a moment, right? And so she's keeping him down in the ditch. He ends up dying while he's down there with her. But she's got to cover his mouth and she's got to stay quiet to get the element of surprise. So, but the axe is left up there. Jovan recovers it and he leaves. So Leonard dies in the ditch, gross. And total B movie horror thing where he's like, you know, and Elsa gets out and keeps on moving. I love how when Jack is grabbed by one of Man Thing's big like hands or paws or whatever, he automatically smiles, which is not the reaction you thought. You're like jumping, if not jump scared, and you're like, wait, why is he having that reaction? So again, it keeps you askew as the viewer. You're not comfortable. You're like not sure what's going on. So this is really good storytelling. So he smiles and he's like, of course I wasn't going to fight you. And then you see the eyes. And I don't know, like, I'm a Gen Xer, so I've seen Sesame Street for years and like the old time version of it. And you had Snuffleupagus and all that. Man Thing kind of reminds me of Snuffleupagus, if that makes any sense. And the eyes, especially, and then like the trunk and like the eyebrows and everything, very, very Snuffleupagus. Mike's laughing. Definitely, right? And so it's automatically, I'm like, it's kind of cute because as soon as the eyes get like all soft and expressive towards Jack, you're like, oh, cute. And then Jack's kind of like gently scolding it, saying, you can't keep counting on me to save you. This is the last time. Come on, dude. And then he asks Man Thing if having the bloodstone attached to him hurts, because we can see from another angle from our vantage point of the viewer that it's like stuck on him. And it's like, and he's like, but it is weakening you. Jack acknowledges that. And then he shows Man Thing this like little round explosive device, and he gives him the plan. I'm going to go to a far wall, I'm going to explode it, and we're going to explode our way out of this maze. However, as this is going on, the big white albino looking thing, Azrael, is sneaking up on them. I wasn't sure if Azrael overheard anything, but probably not, because it's not like Azrael went and tattled on anybody. Oh, Mike agrees. He does remind me of him. Snuffleupagus. And it's funny because like when he's attacking somebody, it's a very different look and expression on its face. But then, if he sees Jack or whatever, he's like, he's cute again. It's so weird. So, and that's like a dichotomy in and of itself, where you get the Marvel balance between like horror and whimsical. So I like how they did that. They pulled it off. So Azrael's sneaking up, so Jack runs off. He locks himself in a room where Elsa is. Now, Elsa had been injured. So she's in a lot of pain. Her leg is really hurting her. They're in like a crypt or like a mausoleum. So the Bloodstone family members, all of their, coffins or what have you. Gosh, mausoleum. I don't know. Mike, what's the little boxes? Azrael. Oh my God, David Bowie. That's who it was. Oh my God. Azrael really reminded me of David Bowie. Not just any David Bowie, but Ziggy Stardust David Bowie. Yes, yes, yes. And I really wish they would put these comments on the replay. I always check the box to have it, and it never shows up. Ziggy Stardust for sure. Yes. Oh my God, thank God, because I was sitting there going, well, it reminds me of something, but this is just my first viewing. Thank you, Mike. Mike Porter for the win there. I appreciate that. Pulled that off really well. And Azrael's death towards the end was total like B movie too. Slit the throat and the thing stuck in its head, and it's like, and it falls over. It's so campy, but like, everything's happening so fast and everything becomes high stakes. You're still worried. You're still afraid. So Elsa, they're caught in the crypt or the mausoleum. Elsa very casually asks how Jack's night is going. I love it. None of this stuff throws her, but she's a bloodstone, so she doesn't care. She doesn't spook too easily. So, and then Jack's all nice back. It's fine. He sees that she's hurt. And unlike the other hunters, again, he's going to help her. He's not trying to avoid her. He's not trying to kill her. He's trying to keep her alive. So first she declines, but eventually he uses his tie as a tourniquet. He treats her injured leg. She's very nonplussed because he clearly doesn't want to fight or hurt anyone. So why is he here? So she says to him even that she has a hard time believing he's had all of those kills that Verussa attributes to him. But he's like, no, I do. I'm just not the type of killer that the others are. So already you're like, okay, the thing's titled Werewolf by Night. You probably figured out by now, if you didn't know before, that Jack Russell's probably the monster in their midst, like they said earlier, when the narrator was like the monster in the midst. And then you see Jack, that's like, okay. Yes, Mausoleum. Thank you, Mike. Because horror isn't my favorite genre, as I said at the beginning. So, Mausoleum versus Crypt versus Tomb versus Grave versus Headstone. I got to think about all these things that I don't normally. I'm a little goody two shoes, skipping up goody two shoes lane there. So, but Jack says he is a killer and he has killed that many. He's just not the type of killer that the others are. And then he acknowledges he does not think that she is a typical hunter either, and just kind of like, like she's. And so again, this circles back to her discussion with Verussa and her whole attitude. And I trained for 20 years, just not with him and just not his way, meeting her father. They've had a falling out. So again, she's a monster hunter, but she's not standing in the shoes of their way. We don't know why, and that's something that they can definitely unpack as she continues through the MCU and going into the Midnight Suns and all of that. You don't want them to spoil everything all at once, right? Pace yourself. So she then asks, of course, because you would too if you were her, if you're not a hunter, then why do you want the stone? Why do you want the bloodstone? And he's like, I don't. And I just love the way he delivered his lines. I don't. That's not the reason why I'm here. So maybe we can help each other. If you help me get the monster out of here alive, I can help you get the stone, because he doesn't care. And he tries to kind of get to know her a little better. So we just kind of have a little bit, it's not an exposition dump, but it's kind of good to see these two characters be empathetic towards one another and to understand one another, because they're going to be on the Midnight Suns together down the line, right? So they're going to be fighting on the same team. So he's basically trying to say to her, hey, it must be tough to be a Bloodstone and be part of that big family. And she's like, no one understands my family at all. And she doesn't want to give him any more details. So again, he shows himself in terms of the quality of his character. And I love this line. He goes, all families, they follow us for good or for bad. They become an atmosphere. I never thought of family and just, folks you've been descended upon, that they still surround you, not just spiritually or whatever, but they're an atmosphere. I love how he described this. They become an atmosphere. Sometimes we think that by doing something very specific, it will change everything or all of that, but it doesn't. And he's right. Or sometimes they're a pain in the butt that we have to save all the time. So you're like, I wonder if Man Thing or Ted is somehow a relative or a longtime friend of his. They must be longtime friends the way this plays out. Whoa. Okay, so then he says, we could just die here, you and I. It's an option. It's not my choice, but it's an option. And she figures out how to get out of there by going up to one of the crypts of Frances Brisbane Bloodstone. So again, this is my first viewing. I'll see like what, if anything, is really important about her besides what we learn in this scene where Elsa pulls a sconce out of one wall. She goes climbing up. She breaks into that particular tomb. And she starts throwing out body parts while she's explaining things. I'm like, thank God this is in black and white. Thank God this is in black and white. Mike says, She-Hulk, Werewolf by Night, Wakanda Forever, Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special, and Phase 5 around the corner. I'm beyond hyped. Oh my goodness. And I love how they're running the through lines through with the Easter eggs. I do love that. They're going to keep us interested for years. I think they have like specifically put down like a 10-year plan, right? I've heard from other sources. I think you probably have too, Mike, right? So Elsa says, when I was a kid, my dad used to tell me stories about my crazy Aunt Frances. He said that if I misbehaved, she would unlock her tomb and come out and pull me back in there to keep her company. And she goes, she knew that when she came back from the dead, one day she'd need an exit strategy. So because of the way he told her that story, she shelved it away and she was like, oh, the exit strategy is the keys because they were locked inside the mausoleum. So now they can unlock the door and they get out. Jack tells her his name and tells her, because again, like I said earlier, like the taxi cab drivers I used to represent down Manhattan and the Bronx, they knew each other by numbers. They never use names. And so the hunters with their corporate culture, they don't use names. As Jack's telling her his name, they all know she's Elsa Bloodstone because of the family. So, she doesn't have to introduce herself to him. But he says, you need to trust me. Here's my name. I'll tell you what I can. You need to trust me. We'll get you the Bloodstone. It'll all be good. And she's like, that's fine. But after that, you're on your own. And he's like, fine. So she gets the dart weapon back with this severed hand, gross, but then gets it off. And she gives Jack instructions in terms of where to best put his explosive device. But then, just when she's done being helpful, she reassures him, cross me and I'll kill you both. And so what's interesting is if you didn't know about Man-Thing, they're keeping this very comic book accurate. Jack explains to her that if you run into Man-Thing, just treat him like you would an old friend and call him by his name, which is Ted. And then he accidentally triggers the bomb, which I think is hilarious. Not only does it, of course, amp up and ramp up the adrenaline for the scene, and keep things moving now, because they're like mini exposition and mini like meeting and meshing is over. But, the stakes are rising, and you're also thinking, how good of a killer is Jack? He probably killed 100 people as a werewolf, sure. But, he's all thumbs when it comes to like the finer points, like dealing with a bomb and setting up and detonating a bomb. So Jovan comes back to where Man-Thing is, right? Or he comes up on Man-Thing. And so does Elsa. Jovan comes up on it first. And so here's the thing. Jack's advice is given the way it's given for a reason. Man-Thing comes into his power and can destroy you with a touch if you're afraid. He feeds off fear, right? So Jovan sees him, has never encountered him before, like Ulysses said. He freaks out at the sight of him, and it touches him, and if he goes on fire, he screams and he dies. So then Man-Thing goes up to Elsa, and it's like, and he's all intimidating, but she keeps her cool. She follows Jack's instructions. Make sure to call him Ted, and then as soon as she does, his eyes go from murderous to sweet, like really quickly, and then we're back to Snuffleupagus again. Mike says Feige has a plan for movies in the theaters for 10 years, and I know that from some employees that they go from Disney Plus, Marvel Studios, project to project nonstop, and that's just in Atlanta alone. I know, because you see at the end all those Atlanta symbols, right? I know, and I know with CGI, like the companies are like all maxed out. Oh my goodness, they must employ so many of them for so much. And that's just Marvel Studios. We're not even talking about Pixar or other properties or competitors. It's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. They've done something in cinematic history that nobody's ever done before. And I know the DCEU wants to copy their business plan. Good luck. Good luck. Mike says MCU is a factory. Yes, it is. But you know what? You could also argue make hay while the sun shines. For every person that says, oh my God, they're putting out so much content, there's other people that go, I cannot get enough. Like if you're a comic book fan, you're going to see all this stuff. You're going to watch it in the movies. You're going to, if you have Disney Plus, you're going to make sure you keep it. Like they're not dumb at all. And they bought other properties and put it on Disney Plus, like the Orville. So that's like, I watched the first episode or two of it, and I was like, this is kind of like Family Guy, but live action. And if it had a baby with Star Trek. But now I'm finishing up the third season and I'm like, wow, okay, they won me over. I'm loving it, says Mike. I am too. And if they weren't like serving up so many different flavors of ice cream, we could all, even the hardcore comic book fans, we could be like, oh, that's too much of one thing. I'm full. I'm gorged. But no, I think it's very important that they're very strategic about what they do. Like WandaVision, you're not going to have anything else like that. That was a unique property unto itself. Loki is going to go on for several seasons, but it's got its own look and feel, and it's very sci-fi type fantasy. You've got Miss Marvel for the young, not just the young and the female. You got She-Hulk for all the people who loved She-Hulk and feminine energy and comedy and oh yeah, legal dramas. And you've got Werewolf by Night and that, and Moon Knight and stuff, because that's all MCU. So if you like werewolves and vampires, the occult and horror, even if it's horror light, you're going to be happy. They've got something for everybody, and they're going to keep juggling and juggling and juggling that as they slowly spin up a new line of Avengers, which of course is going to include She-Hulk. Gotta go to a doctor appointment. I will listen. All right, Mike, say hi to the wife. Enjoy. Good luck with the doctor's appointment. I had a couple of those coming up myself. So I love how we're back to Snuffleupagus mode again. And Elsa is like keeping her cool, but like bemused that this is working. And she's like, you have a lovely name, Elsa tells him, and your friend is waiting for you. So Jack is in the next scene and he's throwing the explosive. And I think it's kind of funny. It's kind of comedic, but it's also like keeping your pulse beat quickening because he keeps throwing the explosive and it keeps bouncing back. The guy is like a total yutz. He's a werewolf that's a yutz, which is kind of weird. His human form is very goofy and very sweet. But eventually he gets the thing to go where it needs to go. Elsa and Man-Thing are convening on that spot. The wall explodes and Man-Thing goes running out. But Elsa, in the meantime, manages to lasso and pull the Bloodstone off of him. And Jack and Elsa smile at one another while MT or Man-Thing is running off. I really like that moment that they shared because it not only shows that they're kind of, friendly and still on the same side, but it's like they appreciate the Man-Thing and they're happy he escaped. And it's kind of like it's a very kindred spirit kind of moment. You know. And then Jack he's keeping eye contact and smiling. He's going to pick up the Bloodstone because it's closest to him. And they had their agreement, and there was nothing in any of the body language or the eye contact that showed that he was going to do anything more than pick it up and give it to her, because that was their deal. She carried through on her part of the deal. Now it's his turn to do it. But he didn't think about it when he went to go pick it up. I think it was an automatic reaction, like, oh, here. And it throws him backwards, and he's paralyzed, it seems, and weak. Azrael and Barrasso are now on the scene. Remember, Jovan's dead, and so is Leorin. So Jack's paralyzed, and Verussa and the assistant comes in. The Bloodstone family assistant comes in, and she goes, the Bloodstone did this to you? She says to Jack, my word. A monster masquerading as one of our own, desecrating the sacred night. So the sacred night is kind of like the funeral or the wake and stuff. Hello? Just a moment. Let me see. Hello? Cats, what are you doing? Take it easy, guys. Take it easy. All right. So Verussa lets us know that the reason why Jack is kind of paralyzed and weak is because he's a monster. So he's a monster in human form, and that's why the Bloodstone did that to him. And Elsa acknowledges she had no idea that Jack was a monster. So they hit him with like some sort of stun gun that looks like a TVA like pruning wand, but it doesn't prune him. And I know that some folks thought that this was the TVA. As I'm sitting here right now, I don't think this is a TVA crossover at all, because the stabs don't like prune him or disintegrate him or anything. they shock him with some, like lightning or energy. So now, circling back around to the opening trailer, where you have Marvel Studios, but it's in black, white, grayscale. And you see the claws going through, which we know are werewolf claws at this point. That kind of like thunderbolt and lightning kind of, that really has to do with the wands that they are using. I guess like I would call it like a stun wand or something like that, but it's not. I don't think at all that they're TVA agents. I don't see any uniform saying TVA on it. I didn't catch that on this first viewing. And again, these are not pruning wands. And I don't think the TVA is connected to the friggin' bloodstones. But these things are to stun any sort of monsters. They're kind of like house staff, right? So they hit Jack with the stun wand, I'll call it, and he passes out. And then Verussa, of course, is delighted because she can't wait to find out what kind of breed of evil that Jack is. Because Verussa considers herself to be good. She doesn't think that she's monstrous at all. Remember, she explained later that the mission of the hunters is that of a mission of mercy. So she thinks it's merciful for humanity and merciful for the monsters that they be slain. So Elsa says that no one should have the bloodstone under the circumstances. But Verussa shouts that the hunt decides. So Elsa then ends up getting shot with one of the stun wands, I'll call it. And she passes out, and Verussa's all house rules. So when we cut to the next scene, Jack awakens in a cage. Elsa's in there with him. She's like, he's like, are you okay? Because he's still acting, because he's still in human form. He's still acting like the Jack Russell that we know. But Elsa's now on defense. She's like, until you rip my throat out, I'm fine. And he's like, I couldn't tell you, I'm a human, kinda. And then he explains, I have systems to manage the hurt that I cause, right? So he's trying to control his lycanthropy. I can say that. So he says, I've been a hunter. I've done my 100+ kills, but any hunting that I do isn't while I'm a human. Every full moon, I know it's coming. I lock myself in, and the next full moon isn't until 5 days. So we're sitting in this cage together. We have plenty of time to figure something out. So he's trying to calm her down so that she's not freaked out and worried. But she's like, dude, 5 days, the bloodstone's going to transform you in 5 seconds. So then he starts to give her more instructions, like he did with how to survive the man thing. This is how you're going to survive with me. Look at me and do not break eye contact with me no matter what. And then he grabs her and he's sniffing her. He's taking in her scent, and he says, I need to remember you. So when he goes and he changes shape, as an animal, as a wolf, dogs have a sense of smell that's more powerful than human beings do, obviously. And certain animals like bloodhounds can go tracking scents very powerfully. So they'll mark on the scent, and then they'll have it. And then they can isolate it and remember it and track it. So when he goes into wolf or werewolf form, he'll remember that she's more kin than enemy. And the eye contact is like to kind of establish her as a pack member. And she's asked if this methodology has worked, and he said once. And I'm not sure when that time was, or what person ended up being spared as I sit here now. They don't make that clear in this movie. So the other hunters approach the cage, and Jack begs to let them go. He says to Verussa to grant him asylum or there will be no mercy. So this is where she talks about the mission of mercy. They're merciful when they kill the monsters for all the innocent lives that would have been taken if they let them stay alive. Throughout, Elsa, once again, Jack's instructions saved her bacon last time, so she's going to do it again. She's maintaining eye contact with him. He apologizes to Elsa. Verussa uses a bloodstone. He transforms. And I love the acting that the actress did for Elsa. What the heck was her name? Let me pull it up because I don't remember it. Laura Donnelly, that's right. She did some great acting as she sat in that cage. Oh my God. Because she's got her limbs like all wrapped around herself protectively, but she manages to maintain eye contact. From the look in her eyes, of course she's scared. Of course she's concerned. And it's like she doesn't want to look away. She knows she has to maintain that eye contact, but it's like the total terror in her eyes and the knowledge that if she messes up, she's dead. And then Verussa laughs at him, but then he grabs her because she's being careless and arrogant. But then everyone's using those like electric stun wands or weapons or whatever. But then Jack explodes into the werewolf form and he busts out of the top of the cage. And Elsa gets up. She's alone in the cage. And then, man, he goes attacking everybody. And long story short, you can tell he can jump super high. He's super strong. He can take a lot of damage and keep going. He attacks Barrasso and bites his ear off. And again, I'm like, thank God this is black and white. Ugh. Elsa jumps up and manages to climb out of the cage because the top's all busted open. So there's a lot of sword fighting. If you've seen this, like I said, it's Spoiler City in the beginning. If you've seen this, there's a lot of really good sword fighting. Elsa kills Barrasso. She ends up killing Azrael. Verussa takes up the Bloodstone to keep the werewolf at bay. And of course, it's doing a lot of damage to the poor guy. But when he's in that hallway with all of those assistants that also have the stun wands that I think mistakenly people are calling TVA agents. I don't think they are. All those like teammates or whatever, man, it gets so gory. If this wasn't in black and white, I wouldn't have been able to handle it. And I couldn't believe how they were playing with the shadows and the door coming down. So, while there was still light, you could see certain things happen. And as stuff got darker, you saw the splatter come up on our side of like the screen or the glass on the screen. Like it was like, wow. You like horror, even though this might be tame because it's not in color. You're like, wow, they went all the way there, didn't they? So Elsa ends up killing Verussa. Or we think she's killed Verussa. Then she's closing in on Jack. And you're all like, this is great horror and like fear and everything. You don't know. Is she's going to be safe? Is he going to remember her? Is he going to attack her? So she wants that bloodstone now that she's killed Verussa. She picks it up. She tucks it into a back pocket and then puts up her hands to show the werewolf she's not being aggressive. This is body language that even a dog should understand. So it's like, Jack, are you still in there? And he's lying on the floor and he sounds all hurt. She closes the gap between them and then he attacks her. So it's like a jump scare thing where you're like, please don't kill her. Please don't kill her. But he does stop because she's following his instructions again. She's keeping that eye contact. He's got it with her and she's got it with him. And again, the acting, the facial acting, it's so rich with like the recognition and the horror and the strain and the fear on both their sides. And she touches his face and like he lets her and it's like, oh my goodness. And then he leaves. And she's on the floor gasping because she's just killed a whole bunch of people. This has been a big cardio workout for her. And she's like, also the adrenaline is just, So, and that was just so well acted. Again, the physical acting was so powerful to me. But then Verussa gets up screaming because, of course, she's not dead. She's mad that Elsa let the werewolf go. She's ready to attack Elsa. And then here comes Man-Thing that just comes through the ceiling and he kills her. Which is another kind of jump scare moment and you weren't expecting it. So it's just so horror. But it's also Verussa being so shrill and you're like, please, a house should drop on that witch. And it does. And I use these words purposely given the music at the end and what happens. So you think to yourself, man, Verussa really did need to die. And Man-Thing looks at Elsa, who's smiling at him because she's grateful. And then he's like, he doesn't care that he killed Verussa or whatever. I'm glad you're happy, lady. And he goes, and then Elsa knows what he wants. And she's like, he went that way, meaning werewolf by night. So Man-Thing leaves. And then the assistant who had been helping Verusa, the head assistant, uh, says, "Well, I'm here to serve you." And she's just like, "Clean everything up." Like all the bodies, all the blood, all the gore. She's not doing it because it's her castle now and it's her bloodstone now. So she's the lady of the house. She got her birthright, but she also totally earned it. She slaughtered everybody, to be fair, or just about everybody that, the werewolf didn't kill. Um, Geez, I mean, she definitely earned it. So then I love that she takes a seat and flops in the very chair that she pulled across when she could have cared less about Verusa's big tribute to her dad. So it's the chair she originally scraped across the floor. She throws herself in it. You do have yet another gramophone in this scene, and it's playing Judy Garland's rendition of Over the Rainbow. And just like in the Wizard of Oz movie, we go from, grayscale black and white to color. The bloodstone, originally it starts bleeding red over her, but then everything goes into color. While Somewhere Over the Rainbow plays all the way through the end of this scene and the movie. And while it's playing, we shift scenes, and Jack wakes up in kind of like this stick hut with Man Thing sitting outside. And you see like all these cards and stuff. Like I was like, were they playing cards? Was this their home? Like, where are they? Or did Man Thing just kind of like create a stick hut to give Jack's body shelter while he slept and healed? And meanwhile, Man Thing's playing freaking solitaire with himself. Like, you go, Ted, you go. And he gives Jack a cup of coffee because he brewed a pot of coffee. And it's so crazy, and like we're not in Kansas anymore kind of feel. And Jack's all very cash, and he's like, "Oh, thanks, Ted." He's so polite and nice. It's hard not to like him, even after all the violence that he did as Werewolf by Night. So again, it's that oddball kind of juxtaposition of horror and splatter with like this absolute sweetheart of a guy. And really, when he's in Snuffleupagus mode, an absolute sweetheart of a monster in Man Thing or Ted. So then, of course, he's asking if she or Elsa is okay. And Ted's like, mm-hmm. And he's like, good, that's good. And he's so just like tired and sweet and gentle. And it's interesting because he's got what looks like a black silken cape on him with like a scarlet red inlay, and the way everything falls on his shoulders and the red is folded over. I don't know. You tell me. I think he kind of looks like Dracula. And that is an Easter egg also that's being dropped for the Midnight Suns, because it's not like Mephisto and all of his minions were the only enemy that everyone has to fight. Dracula is, also a Midnight Suns enemy, and more specifically, a Blade enemy. And we know that Blade is coming out. They're rewriting the whole thing now to be shooting in 2023. So good luck, guys. And so, but Judy Garland's Over the Rainbow is playing this whole time. This scene is in color too, which I like. Everything's now in color. We're basically caught up to now. And you get like this old timey script look in the end that's overlaid on it. So I just think that this was pitch perfect. I love how they introduced these characters and kind of laid down the joint foundation or history for how Elsa Bloodstone will in the future work with Jack Russell or Werewolf by Night. Man Thing can factor in there too. That's really cool. And we know that Blade is coming, and we know that we already have Moon Knight, and we know, of course, we already have Doctor Strange. So, and thanks to Madison in She-Hulk, we now have Mephisto too. So everything is definitely moving right along as we go into phases 5 and 6 for the Midnight Suns to come around. So I'm really, really excited about it. And as someone who's not normally a horror fan, I love how they did this so it's still a horror that's accessible to everybody, and you still have like the 1960s, 70s like B-movie splatter gore going on, but because again, it's black, white, and grayscale, and the way they shot and the way they kind of shrouded some of it but not all of it It was very tastefully done. I have a very hard time criticizing this at all. So that gives me a lot of hope that Blade will be very well done. Because it's hard after loving Blade in the 90s, like, will it ever be as good as that? But I think it will be even better, right? Because you've got some really good writers and they're rewriting the whole thing to make Mahershala Ali own the character more. So I like it. I think they're being so careful with all their casting choices, the way things are written, the way things are depicted or shown that go with each one of the genres that they have been unleashing on us in Disney Plus. So that being said, definitely make sure you subscribe. I go live here at least once a week, if not more. My video editor and I, because he's back from getting married and all that good stuff, you will have more edited videos starting next week. Um, and and because I've had a lot of requests behind the scenes, and I really appreciate it, for me to do another Rings of Power review, I will do that. So I'm going to get off now. I am going to go watch Rings of Power. What are we up to? Episode 7 or 8. And I will come back a little bit later with that. We do all things Marvel here, Marvel comic books. We do all things, fantasy sci-fi here, I guess, because I love it that you guys want me to do more. I'm very happy to do it. I love talking shop with y'all. So, Mike, good luck at the doctor's over there. Say hi to the wife. And hey, everybody. Thank you for showing up. I appreciate it. And I will talk to you guys later. Bye.